Welcome to Free to Speak, the New Zealand Free Speech Union podcast. If you enjoy the show, subscribe for uncensored conversations and free speech news from New Zealand and beyond.
Kia ora, and welcome to Free to Speak, the official podcast of the New Zealand Free Speech Union. My name is Dane Giraud. I am a council member of the union and your host, and joining us today is Brian Boyd. Brian is a professor of literature, known primarily as an expert in the life and works of author Vladimir Nabokov. Thanks for joining us on the podcast, Brian.
Kia ora, Dane. It's a pleasure.
Great. So, and you're at Auckland University.
Well, I'm retired now.
Oh, retired. Okay.
Yeah. An emeritus.
Sorry?
An emeritus.
An emeritus. Oh, great. Fantastic. It's an honor to have you here. We have a little bit of history. About 20 years ago or something like that, maybe 25 years ago, I read Laughter in the Dark, which was a Nabokov book, and was so overwhelmed by it that I had to speak to someone. So I found your email and reached out and just said, my head's full of all this stuff. This is just the most amazing thing I've ever read. What should I do? And you said, read The Illusion Defense. I think that was your reply at the time.
Yes, well, that's always probably always my suggestion for most readers to go to as their first Nabokov. It's so warm, so heartbreaking, and so dazzling. Yeah, at the same time.
And Laughter in the Dark was more of it would be considered a minor work, wouldn't it?
Definitely, yes. I think Nabokov thought it was the weakest of his novels, really.
Yeah, I mean, if that's someone's weak, still pretty good. So we're going to talk about Nabokov's most controversial book, arguably one of the more controversial books ever written, and that's Lolita, which he wrote in 1955, correct?
He wrote it between 1949 and 1953 and got it published in 55.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's start by maybe a little bit of background on yourself, actually. Like, what brought you to Nabokov?
My parents knew I had a passion for books, and they were not well educated. They both left school at 14 in Belfast and Dungannon, and eventually they bought a bookstore with a lending library attached to it to satisfy me, and I used to refile books for them. And when I was about 12, I came across this very copy, in fact, of Lolita, and saw that it was. I realized that it was a dirty book, and that it also had comments in the dust jacket from Lionel Trilling, V.S. Pritchett, Graham Greene, Philip Toynbee, and so on, and Bernard Levin. And I thought, well, this is a classic and a dirty book, so I snuck it home and hid it under my pillow and read it. It was way over my head at the time, but it wasn't really the start of my passion for Nabokov. I used to sort out orders for regular customers in the bookstore for magazines, and read everything as I was doing it, every magazine. So Time magazine had a cover story on Nabokov in 1969 on the publication of Nabokov's latest novel, which is Ada, and there was a boxed interview inside with a headline in red: I've never met a more lonely, more lucid, mad mind than mine. I thought, that sounds interesting.
Yeah,
so I read the interview, and it just blew me away. So I had to go to the local public library, which is just around the corner in Palmerston North, and find the latest of his novels available, which of course wasn't yet Ada, and that was Pale Fire. And I read that following the I was 16 by then, following the crazy cross references. So you have about 5 fingers stuck in different parts of the book to try to get back to the original forward that you're reading. And it was a funny experience in itself, but you also learn all sorts of secrets about the story that you're not supposed to know yet, and that was just fascinating. And so this sense of discovery that I had with Pale Fire has been the thing that's kept me coming back to Nabokov. I then eventually, I did a master's thesis on Nabokov and thought that, well, that's Nabokov out of my system. And then went to Toronto for a PhD and started working on a thesis on John Barth, more or less a generation younger than Nabokov, and got bored after a while and went back to Ada, which is one of the three books I'd written my MA thesis on, and I just saw on the first page that there were things that I just had no idea of when I first wrote about it, that were so fascinating. And I just went into the reference library at Toronto and just tried to annotate the first 5 pages, and discovery after discovery. And so I ended up focusing my whole thesis on that book. And since then I've written, that's come out as a book in a couple of editions, 3 Russian editions too, I think, now. And I also have a website on it, which is about 2,500 pages of my annotations, plus the text of the novel, plus hyperlinks to images and so on. And yeah, so I've gone into it in a big way.
Yeah. So, who was Vladimir Nabokov?
Well, he was born in 1899, died in St. Petersburg, died in Montreux, Switzerland in 1977. He was the son of a very wealthy, very cultured family. His father was a statesman who had the great honor of being imprisoned by both the Tsar and by Lenin. And they left after the revolution in 1917, first to the Crimea, and then when the Reds came into the Crimea under some machine gun hail, they fled on a steamer to Greece and then to London. Nabokov's father was a great Anglophile, and Nabokov went to Cambridge and did a degree there, and then his family had moved to Berlin just in his last semester in Cambridge. His father, who was also the editor of the great liberal newspaper of the Russian immigration in Berlin, which had 400,000 Russians in it, and about 200 publishing companies, because publishing was difficult in the Soviet Union at that stage, so they were shipping books out to there. But because he was editor of this liberal newspaper and also had been the leader of the Constitutional Democratic Party in the first Russian Duma, he was regarded and was a member of the provisional government after the first collapse of the Russian regime in February 1917. In fact, he wrote the Tsar's abdication speech. He was assassinated in 1922 by some Russian far right people, and then Nabokov was already writing. He'd published his first book at 16 through his own money, self-published, but he was also writing regularly in his father's newspaper under the pseudonym of Syrian to distinguish himself from his father's name, because his father was on the masthead. And he was already hailed as a major poet in his early 20s, but then switched to prose really most of the time in 1923, 24, and published his first novel in 25. And he was acclaimed as the star of the Russian immigration. And people said things like he has saved the whole immigration. And then he married a Russian Jewish woman, Vera, and they had a child in 1934. They stayed in Germany until 1937. when they moved to Paris, had a very meager existence there. But then and he was trying for ages to get out to the US and managed in 1940, just as the tanks were rolling through northern France, and then switched to, well, he had already, in fact, you mentioned Laughter in the Dark, in which he wrote in a way as a novel that could be easily adapted for the screen. It has all sorts of visual effects, blindness, and it involves a cinema usherette and so on. And in 1936, he translated it into English and published it in the US. So he was preparing for his move, I think, even then. And then, in 1940, he managed to get out. Another Russian writer, Mark Aldanov, got an offer of a job at Stanford, but he felt his English wasn't good enough, so he passed the offer on to Nabokov. That enabled him to get out of France and into the US. And then he worked in the 1940s in academia at Stanford, at Wellesley College in Boston, at Harvard, at Cornell. At the same time as he was a passionate lepidopterist. He loved butterflies. He had collected them obsessively since he was 7, and knew all the butterflies of the world by the time he was 9. He was very precocious, and published his first article in English on butterflies in 1919, and then published other articles in the next 2 decades, and then worked at the American Museum of Natural History in 1940-41, and became the curator of Lepidoptera at Harvard's Museum of Comparative Zoology in 1943, and was working long hours in the 40s, and his work was well received at the time, but it wasn't really until the late 1980s when people started working on the Latin American butterflies that he'd reorganized, and realized how amazing his work was, that people realized his stature as a lepidopterist. Anyway, so he was also writing for the New Yorker in the 40s and publishing his first novels and his wonderful autobiography, Speak Memory. Then in 1949, he came back to an idea that he'd had in 1939 of writing a story about a child, a pedophile. He wrote that in 1939 in Russian, and his friends counseled him against publishing it, so he didn't. But the idea kept on nagging at him, and in 1946 he began thinking about it again and telling friends that he was going to be working on this. And 1949 he sat down and wrote it after writing his autobiography, and that took him. Well, he wrote it in under 4 years while he was preparing new material to teach it at Cornell, and also writing his last lepidopterological works, and beginning to translate what became a 4-volume translation and commentary of Pushkin's Eugen Onegin. So he was working busily, and then as he was finishing Lolita, he wrote a very different kind of novel, Pnine, about, rather than a grisly pervert, about somebody who's put upon by everybody simply because he's Russian and doesn't speak English well in America. And then Pale Fire, he wrote. When Lolita came out, there was a great deal of hesitation about whether it could be published. All the story about that meant that it had lots of advance publicity when it was eventually published in the US and in the UK, so it became a bestseller, and Nabokov could retire from Cornell and moved to Europe to be close to his sister and his son, who was by then learning training as an opera singer in Milan. And he kept on writing wonderful books until he died in 77. There you go.
So, oh no, that's fantastic. I didn't understand that. What do you call the butterfly study of butterflies?
Lepidopterology. Lepidoptera is the scientific name for butterflies and moths. Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought this was a hobby for him. I didn't realize that he was quite leading in the field there.
Yeah, no, the time he invested was pretty small, but like the subsequent curator of lepidopterology of Lepidoptera at the Museum of Comparative Zoology, a really brilliant scientist, was organizing an exhibition on Nabokov simply because of his name, and she didn't understand the depth of his work until she got into it, and then she set some of her students, PhD students, to work on this hypothesis that Nabokov just tossed off about the sequence in which the blues, which were his specialty, came from Asia across the Bering Strait into the Americas, and he's just tossing off this hypothesis, but everything that he said in a sentence or two turned out to be right, and they had no way of possibly figuring that out until about 2010. Yeah.
Fascinating. That is just a brilliant mind. I mean, there's so much I want to ask you about. Even
just to go back on his brilliance. I mean, one other thing that he was very interested in, was chess, and he was a world-class chess composer. So he would relax after composing a novel by composing a chess problem.
Yeah, no, just. I mean, that's. I mean, chess is a good way to. The books that I've read, I haven't read all of them, but the books I have read, like chess, is probably quite analogous to to his writing style, because he's very unique, isn't he? To me, I think he's not Kafka, but like again, I think there's that depth and strangeness and the idea of hidden meaning and everything. They're probably the closer ones in my mind. What would you say to that?
I think with Kafka, there's always a sense that the meaning is elusive and will always remain so, and you're no wiser, you're more frustrated at the end. I mean, it's a brilliant kind of frustration, but with Nabokov, there are answers. Nabokov deliberately makes things very engaging on the surface, but he also has little connections between parts of the story, and if you pay attention, if they catch your curiosity, you suddenly see something else, and it keeps on expanding and expanding. So, I mean, I think one of the motivations for his writing the way he did was that he felt that he likes to quote the glory of God is to hide things. This is an old quote, but the glory of God is to hide things, and the glory of man is to find them, to discover them. And so he felt that his excitement about working on butterflies and discovering new organs in butterflies and discovering, also he just looked at their wing scale patterns in greater depth than had ever been looked at before. He felt that he wanted to give that kind of excitement to his readers. The endless discovery, and that's certainly what's kept me hooked.
Yeah, oh no, it's incredible stuff. He's singular completely. I don't think anyone's ever been like him or will ever be like him again. I mean, and I know Lolita was adapted into a couple of films, but I was even saying to you on the phone that it's a book. This is one of these examples where it can't be anything but that. Like I just don't think you can adapt something like this.
Well, yes, and Stanley Kubrick, who did the first adaptation, said that Lolita was the only film he wished he'd never done because it was too good a book.
No, 100%. So let's look at Lolita specifically now. So very controversial work, and I guess I have to ask a question: what would have possessed a man at that, starting in the 30s? He was doing. He had the dummy run for what's it called?
The
His
Enchanter.
first version of it. It's like
The Enchanter.
the Enchanter. Is that complete, or was that like a more of a fragment?
No, it was complete. It was a novella, so about 70 pages. It was released as a novel by itself in English, but it was a bit short as a novel. So Dmitry Nabokov, the son, wrote a long introduction. I reviewed it for the listener and suggested the title for the review, Prehash. So it's kind of yeah. Made a hash of it. I mean, it doesn't strike me as being a very good book. It seems to me overwritten. And I think partly because Nabokov was uncomfortable with the subject and used his style. His Russian style was getting very ornate by this late stage in his career. And there's a kind of stylistic overkill. It's a bit like Proust, with the level of literary heartburn taken to an extreme. But and it lacks it lacks all sorts of things that are in Lolita. But
So what do you think possessed him to write this
well,
at all? I mean, why did he think it? I mean, it would be it amazes me that he would have thought it could fly back then. Like his friends were probably advising him quite well.
yeah. Well, I think the real reason that he wrote it was because he believed very strongly in the innocence of children, and so he always wanted to challenge himself. He had a very rosy disposition, even though he's got a lot of murderers and so on as even as narrators, little and central characters, and he wanted to challenge himself always by looking at the reverse side of things to try and temper his rosiness. And so he was also fascinated by love. So he and the intensity of romantic love. So he offers this story of in The Enchanter of a man who marries a woman for the sake of access to her daughter. It ends up with him being accidentally killed when he with the wife dies. He has the daughter in a hotel bedroom, and is about to violate her for the first time. And she wakes up, freaks out, screams, and he rushes outside and is killed by a passing truck. So it's a much thinner story than Lolita. And also in The Enchanter, it's a third person novel. So the style in a way is supposed to echo the complexity of the character's mind. I'm not sure. That's part of the failure of the book. I think that it doesn't quite justify the richness of the style and the relative poverty, thinness of the imagination of the central character. Whereas in Lolita, what makes it so difficult even now is that it's written by this perpetrator, the pedophile, who
in the form of a confession, isn't it?
After he has he tries to, well, he marries the mother again for access to the child. The mother is killed in an accident, and he manages to take Lolita from motel to motel for 2 years before she escapes. And so this is his confession, his excuse in a way for the murder that he commits of somebody who abducts her, or frees her, if you like, from him, but who is also a paedophile.
Quilty.
Quilty, yes, whose name is very carefully hidden from the reader for a long time, even after from Humbert, the narrator. He doesn't know it. He's not even sure whether he's just being paranoid. This car follows them out to the American, all the way through the American West. And then when Lolita disappears, he tries to find out who this person was, and he manages to catch up with Lolita, and who is left Quilty by now, and tries to find out her name. She does tell him eventually, and he withholds it from the reader for another 20 pages, and all the while saying that of course we know what this name was, and of course we don't. So yeah, it's one of the little paths of discovery. So it's a kind of one of the many things that Lolita does is it's a detective novel where the protagonist says on the first page that he's a murderer, and you've got to figure out who he murders. And it's not until very near the end of the book you find that out. And he lets you think for a while that he's going to murder Lolita's mother, then Lolita herself, but no, it's the abductor.
Mm, mm.
Or
And so,
liberator.
yeah. So the history of publication. So what happens there? Because this is, once it comes out, it's very super controversial. One of the more controversial works of art probably to ever be released, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't think that's
and the only one I think that is at least as controversial now as it was when it was published. So if you think of something like Madame Bovary, which was banned in 1857, or Ulysses, which was banned in 22, they seem perfectly uncontroversial now.
Yeah.
I mean, one's about adultery. One does have a lot of graphic sex and obscenity. Well, but it has a lot of other things too. But Lolita, because it's a story of pedophilia told from the point of view of the pedophile, who is convinced that he is his love for Lolita is something transcendent. It still gives people very uncomfortable feelings. I mean, there's something rapturous about the prose.
Yeah.
And yet you know that the rapture is for a morally very, very disturbing end. So yeah, it's always uncomfortable.
When I talk to people about the book now and say, "Have you read it?" I do get people going, "Oh, I wouldn't read that," or like, "You've read that?" There's a judgment, but yeah, I mean, but this is look, it's incredible. It's just incredible. The rapturous prose you talk about, you're sort of getting pulled into his vision. It's quite intoxicating, and then you start sort of questioning yourself. It's a wonderful trick that gets played on you, I think. So yeah, I mean, I've gone back to it a few times because it's just such an experience. But so going back to the publishing, so he writes this thing. I don't know how he would have thought it would have got published in the day. I mean, that could be my naivete or ignorance at play there. But
well, he was being published by the New Yorker, so his autobiography, Speak Memory, came out in chapters there, and he was getting rapturous responses. And he had a contract with the New Yorker that he had to give them first reading rights. So they saw everything that he was writing and could say, yes, we want that, or no, we don't. And he knew that the New Yorker, which was much more prudish then than now, was going to have problems with this. He also was planning to publish it anonymously because he was at Cornell and he thought that there would be reverberations that Cornell
could be cancelled.
So yeah, and he well, he did show it to Catherine White, as editor of the New Yorker, and she says it's great, but we can't touch it. And he had a lot of friends in the US publishing industry by then who were very keen to publish him, but one after the other, they said no to Lolita in 1954. And then in desperation, he contacted his agent in France, who submitted it to Maurice Giraudius's Olympia Press, which published serious literature, but also material that was pornographic. And in fact, Giraudius loved mixing the two. So he published Henry Miller, Samuel Beckett, William S. Burroughs, J.P. Dunleavy, and writers like that. But yeah, he also published Lolita in English in 1955, and then at the end of the year, Graham Greene was asked to name his 3 favorite books of the year, and one of them was Lolita. And I mean, I don't know how I'll show you. This is the let's see. This is what it came out in 2 volumes. This is the Olympia Press edition. And then a man called John Gordon, I think it was a book reviewer. Anyway, he wrote an indignant letter to the British press saying that this was the filthiest book he'd ever read, and so on. And so Graham Greene, amusingly, picked up on this and set up a John Gordon Society to ban pornography or filth in paintings, books, ceramics, and he was also going to release a little book banner banned by the John Gordon Society, and of course this got lots of publicity and started inquiries from British and American publishers about how they could get hold of the book. It was a very, very slow process. So in one of Nabokov's closest publishing friends was Joseph Epstein, who later co-founded the New York Review of Books. And Epstein was working for Doubleday, and he tried to create an atmosphere in which Lolita would be taken seriously. Oh, I should say that Giraudius, when he was publishing the Olympia Press edition, insisted that Nabokov not publish it anonymously, that his name be on the cover, and Nabokov agreed to that. And others said, well, Nabokov's style would have been recognizable to anybody anyway. But so Epstein was trying to create an atmosphere in which Lolita could be published in America, and there already had been a couple of cases of the book being imported into the US and being seized by customs, but then released. So that was a good sign. But Epstein published this irregular periodical, the Anchor Review, which published selections of Lolita, about 1/3 of the book, and critical commentary by a Columbia professor and a few other things to give it some kind of academic clout, and also got Nabokov to write what would become an essay on Lolita that would become the afterward, published with it thereafter. In the afterward, Nabokov writes in a very, very high tone, as if a book on this literary level doesn't even need to be considered. The idea of censorship is just so absurd, I won't even discuss it.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then, so Lolita had so many convolutions in its history. So it was published in English in France. Then, because of the scandal, Gallimard, the leading French publisher, published it in French, and it was also published in excerpts in La Nouvelle Revue Française, which was their leading literary journal. And then the British government banned. This was after the British and French had been colluding in the Suez War in '56. They got the French government to ban Lolita in being imported into, or no, ban Lolita altogether. And then the French, of course, were famous for the liberality on these matters in the '50s, so they're ahead of the rest of the world. But they, because of that Suez complicity, they agreed. And then Giraud, knowing the literary standing of the book, got a campaign against the ban and published this book called L'Affaire Lolita, and took a case against Gallimard. And I was just looking at it for the first time in ages. There's at the end, La Censure Internationale, international censorship, with letters from James Joyce to his publisher and letters from Lawrence to his publishers about Lady Chatterley's Lover. So he waged a successful campaign that got the ban lifted. So this was all before it was published in the US, and then in the US it was published in 1958, and because of all the build-up of the story, it outsold every book since Gone with the Wind in the first few days. And there was,
because it's had such a publicity campaign, court cases and international scandal for years.
So somebody wrote in a review, it shines and stinks like rotten mackerel by moonlight. And so, the book's fortune was made.
Yeah. So, which countries, like some of the states, because I know Catcher in the Rye, that's another one that today we look at and think,
yes.
Oh, well.
Was that ever banned?
Why was that ever banned? But then again, I mean, it was in the back pocket of a few assassins and would-be assassins, wasn't it, that novel? So, I mean, it's a strange one there. Just the cynicism, I think. And how do you ban cynicism? It's pretty tough. But I think there were states that banned Catcher in the Rye. Like did Nabokov fall foul of certain states in the US?
Well, there were certain public libraries and so on. Every time that sort of thing happened, of course, a spike in sales happened. So I'm friends with Art Spiegelman, the author of Mouse, the wonderful comic about his parents getting through Auschwitz, where the Jews are represented as mice and the Germans as cats. And it sold very well in when it first came out as a book. It got home the first Pulitzer Prize ever for comics, but it was banned about 6 years ago. And so there's an enormous spike in its sales for the first time in a long time.
It's amazing, isn't it? Like censorship is like, I made a digital film in 1999 or 2000. It was one of the early films made on video that we did here in New Zealand, and we were going to be in the New Zealand Film Festival, and so we had to get rated, and we didn't know that. We were we're younger and didn't think about it, and it's like, okay, so it cost us $1,000 or something. We're waiting for it, and the rating to come back, and we were like, oh man, this is, I wonder what they'll give it, and we were like, oh, well, if it's too high, then maybe that'll limit the audience and everything. But then we were like, it came back, it was an R16, and we were like, if only it had been an R18, didn't we do enough? I thought we were way more controversial, but it wasn't an RP16. So it was like, well, at least it's an R16, a pure R16. Like we wanted the controversy of a higher rating. Like it just, I don't know what it was. Like it just made us feel like we'd done something that our peers hadn't done. Really, I think that was one of the distinctions we wanted, that we went further than many of our peers would have gone. don't think that's probably the motivation for Nabokov. But
well, some people suspected that it was, that he wanted to
okay.
make money from Lolita. And in fact, I mean, it was really a great risk because it might not have got published at all. And in fact, the book that he wrote to make money was Pnine while he was, as he was finishing Lolita, he started writing Pnine, which segments into chapters designed for the New Yorker, which paid very well. It was the best paying literary magazine in the world. And the Pnine stories were so geared to a New Yorker audience. So that was the one that he was writing for money in case Lolita just couldn't get published. Yeah.
And so, okay, so public libraries and there would have been states probably that caused, there would have been uproar in different pockets.
Yeah,
about
and it was banned. Well, then in after the publication in the US, the British wanted to publish it, and the censorship laws were fairly tight then. But there was a change to the censorship laws that was coming in, and that again there was another campaign in Britain to get as many distinguished writers as possible to write on Lolita. And Nabokov was actually giving a lecture in Cambridge on Russian literature and censorship the 2 days before the publication of Lolita, and they had a big launch party on the 6th of November 1959, and the censorship bill was under consideration, hadn't quite was being discussed in Parliament, was about to be enacted. And at the launch party, somebody had given them a tip-off that the British government was not going to challenge Lolita, so everybody was exuberant.
interesting.
Yes, but then it came out and it did very well in England too, but it was banned in South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand for a while.
Oh, okay. So how long was it banned here?
I don't know, about 3 or 4 years, I think.
Mm.
I think in that time, so that was 59, so it was probably banned straight away then when it became available in New Zealand, which was 1960. The law, the challenge to the unexpurgated edition of Lady Chatterley's Lover happened in 1960, and so that case was lost by the prosecution, so Lady Chatterley's Lover could be allowed out, and once that happened, there's no reason to ban Lolita anymore. But there was a kind of censorship also in the film versions, so Hollywood was pretty prudish in those days because of the Hays Code, and Stanley Kubrick was blown away by the novel and came to Nabokov in about 1958, I think, with the proposition to adapt it to the screen. But in order to make it acceptable, he was going to change the story so that Humbert marries Lolita at the end, as if that makes it all right.
He made an honest woman of her.
Yeah. And Nabokov, of course, said no to that. But then Kubrick kept at him to try to write a screenplay, and Nabokov didn't want to. But then he suddenly, I think he was out chasing butterflies and got an idea for how he could do it, and he wrote a screenplay for Kubrick. Kubrick, well, he cut down half of Nabokov's screenplay, which was getting very exuberant, very surreal. Kubrick said it would take 6 hours to film. But he cast Sue Lyne as Lolita. She was 14 rather than 12, as Lolita is in the book, and she looked 17. And there's never any mention of the fact that she's, much younger than she looks. She looks like somebody in her last year of high school.
Yeah,
and it's so coy about the sexuality the relationship. So that the raunchiest thing that happens in the movie is the opening credits, where Humbert is painting Lolita's toenails. You know. And then in
That becomes the iconic scene from the film, doesn't it? Yeah.
In the late 90s, Adrian Lyne, who'd done Fatal Attraction, got the rights to Lolita, and of course he wanted to do everything that was impossible for Kubrick back in the day. So he stressed the sexuality, and he stressed Lolita's youth. So she's in braces and blowing bubble gum when we first see her. So it's a very, very different Lolita.
It is, and people. I mean, you could argue the film sort of stands on its own merits, but it's not the book.
No,
It just can't give you that insight into Humbert's mind, which to me is the whole point.
There is a woman director, I understand, who's working on adapting the book, and I think from what I've read of what she says, and she's done a lot of films about female sexuality, she really understands what's at issue in the book, which is great. And then there are, I mean, it is something that people think is an invitation to pedophilia, but I have had correspondence with women who deal with sexual abuse in the Americas and in Europe, who say that Lolita is just a brilliant, brilliant book for showing the whole complexity of pedophilia, the self-delusion of the perpetrators, so on.
I recognize that in it. No, 100%. Yeah. So, look, I'm a screenwriter. I'd love to get my hands on that Nabokov screenplay. Have you ever read it? Does it exist?
Oh, yes, it's published. It's published.
Oh, wow. So I could just find it online.
Yeah, it's published in a kind of botched version, really. Nabokov had two versions, the 6-hour version and the 3-hour version, and he's because Kubrick asked him to go away and rewrite it, so he did and cut it down. But when it came to publishing, he had this 11-book contract with McGraw-Hill for a lot of money, and this was one of the things he needed to get ready in time for the deadline for the 11 books, and he didn't take sufficient care, so that it's a conflation of the two different screenplays, and so there are inconsistencies between it, and it's it's not his best work. On the and also the 6-hour version, it has been published in German, but not in English yet. And that's got some very, very funny scenes. It's quite surreal in a lot of ways, the screenplay, and it shows how exuberant Nabokov's imagination was. He's very, very a stickler when it came to translation. That you had to translate word or absolutely literally, and he wasn't quite as much a stickler as Samuel Beckett in adapting his works, but he was very uncomfortable about aspects of the Kubrick film that he saw, and like Peter Sellers' wonderful ad-libs that had nothing to do with the original.
So what do you think the impact has been from this novel on censorship and publishing? Do you think there was a lasting impact, or there were ripples that came from it that affected other writers? Did it embolden other writers, do you think? Or and did it sort of liberalize publishing?
Well, things were changing anyway, I think. So, like Henry Miller wrote his very highly erotic fiction in the 30s, and that was being read in the Olympia Press editions in the US in the 50s. Things like Playboy started up in 53. And Lady Chatterley's was allowed out. So things were changing everywhere, and just an interesting aspect. I mentioned, I started off when you asked about why Nabokov wrote Lolita, I said partly because of the very high value placed on the innocence of children. So one of the things he does in Lolita, he's got a forward to the book by an academic, a pompous academic.
Yeah.
Um,
I love that.
yeah, as it's very, very funny when you read it with the right right expectations. But I think it was there in order to stop children picking up the book because it was over their heads.
Interesting.
And in Ada, which was published in '69, so when Nabokov's works were being by that time, Playboy had become the best paying literary magazine in the world, and they were publishing Nabokov. And also, sexuality was much more in the open in movies and everywhere. And Ada is much, much more erotic than Lolita. It's a kind, as I keep on saying, it's a kind of literary version of Bosch's The Garden of Earthly Delights. So it's got lots and lots of very vivid sex. But again, he writes an opening chapter that is the most difficult thing he ever wrote in order to ensure that children didn't read on. Yeah. It built in self-censorship.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I can draw a parallel to a script I'm actually working on now, which has children and violence in it, and the director wanting some sort of framing device just to create a little bit of distance and give an out in a way. And I guess by that pompous academic saying at the beginning, we're dealing with a criminal here. This isn't your, your average person. He is doing that too. There is a little bit of you can point to that introduction and say, well, there is an early condemnation of what's going on, I think even for adult readers, Would you agree with that?
Yes. And you were asking about the repercussions of Lolita's publication on censorship. Well, and I said I think things were liberalizing generally, but then because of the concern about pedophilia and even the hysteria in the late 80s and 90s, people began to think that Lolita was, like those friends of yours who thought you were a bit suspect for even having
read it. Yeah.
People just didn't want to go near it. Didn't understand that it wasn't at all advocating pedophilia. That it was a really strong case against it. But yeah, so people who know nothing about it have backed off Lolita in a way. Almost anything else can get published these days, but something like that. So yes, it's curious that something like again, the Art Spiegelman's Mouse comes up. Well, of course, there's the censorship from the right in the US these days. This is a different thing, and that's what caught Spiegelman. It's a wonder somebody hasn't made a campaign against Lolita from the American right.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'd say there would be people that would, if it was brought to their attention, they might try to make some hay out of it. Yeah, now that's fascinating. I mean, the lesson here to me is that censorship often amplifies a product or a message, doesn't it? It's like you try to suppress, and it becomes a PR campaign, doesn't it?
As Bertrand Russell said at some point, if you ban trains, people would get a perverse interest in trains.
Yeah, they would, but the impulse to censor remains. Well, it's like no lessons are ever learned from this. I mean, the way to deal with material like that you don't like would be to just forget about it, and it's the Streisand effect thing, just ignore it, and it may go away. It could have been just a little underground novel, even though I don't think it would have been because of the brilliance of the writing. I don't think that's realistic at all, but that seems to be the lesson with all of this.
Yeah.
I think I'd like to start a free speech union book club, really, That would be a good idea, because there were so many books like this. Lady Chatterley's Lover. I'd love to get into the court cases there, the court case there and everything. But Catcher in the Rye is another one I come back to, because it's what I find fascinating about that book is that, and when we were dealing with the hate speech laws, people would, they'd try to assure us by saying, well, the level will be, the threshold will be so high that most people won't even be affected by it. But that assumes that the most provocative statement is the most harmful statement. And we can't always guarantee that, and I think Catcher in the Rye is a good example of that. It's like, it's not on its face is anywhere near as controversial as Lolita, but it's about a cynical young man. And that seems to have been enough to really set some young readers off. But today, what law would ever hoover that up?
Well, why don't you reestablish the John Gordon Society?
We need something like that.
Yeah.
No, because these lessons from literature and art really can be applied across the board, I think. The whole idea of the Streisand effect and all that stuff. But yeah, no.
Just as you were talking, I was thinking about older prudish standards look so absurd in retrospect. So when Tolstoy's Anna Karenina was being translated into English in the 1870s or 80s, there's a chapter ending where Anna is pregnant. It's the end of the last sentence in the chapter. And in English, they didn't dare translate the word pregnant, so they left it in Russian, Beramila.
So, is this a typo? Yeah. Oh, well, Brian, I think this has been a fantastic discussion on this great book, this masterpiece. I would say to supporters, test yourselves,
Yes.
push yourselves and read it, because you will be rewarded. Like, he is a masterful writer. I mean, I got so many questions just about Nabokov as a writer I could throw at you, but then it becomes a literary podcast. Maybe I should moonlight and do another one. But anyway, no, but thank you once again for giving us this time and taking us through a fascinating history of censorship.
Thank you for listening to Free to Speak. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and consider sharing the podcast with others. We release new episodes regularly, and subscribing is the easiest way to stay up to date. If you have any questions, feedback or suggestions, you can contact us at podcast@fsu.nz. If you want to find out more about the New Zealand Free Speech Union, visit fsu.nz.